Thank you, Asa. Thanks everybody for letting me have a few minutes to speak here. I'm going to break with the schedule just a little bit. We plan to have a Q&A session after all three of speakers. I've got something else that I've got to run to pretty quickly after my part of the presentation, so I'm going to do a little bit of a shorter, abbreviated version, and then maybe leave a little bit of open time for Q&A. The way I usually present, I'm pretty free-flowing. If something really grabs you or a question pops up in your mind when I'm going through it, just raise your hand and start yelling at me, and we'll stop and kind of talk about something maybe that's in your market or in your area of town. Quick question before I get going. This is going to be focused on the new home industry. Who in here has sold or worked on a new home sale in the last year or 6 months or so? Okay, awesome, good. Well, great. I think just from an overall standpoint, I think we've all gone through or seen the slower listing pace or the kind of lower inventory numbers in the existing home market. And really the new home market has been the biggest driver of providing an alternative inventory to the overall home market. We think that trend is going to continue, and especially what you're going to start to see is some increased development, some new communities coming online from the new home market, and you're also going to see builders start to bring on new product lines. It's been a few years since a real fresh product line has come on from a lot of these builders, so you're going to see targeted towards the buyer profiles of today, more so today than what they were really focused on 5 or 6 years ago, which is going to really offer some really good options to your buyers out there. The other side of it, though, is that the underlying lot cost and the cost of building those homes are going up, so prices are going to begin to rise a little bit more significantly than they have probably over the last year. All right, so quickly, what is Metrostudy, and who am I? Metrostudy, every day every 90 days in all of these red areas that are on the map, we drive through every single new home community in each of these markets, and essentially we're counting lots. We have field researchers that have plats in their hand, and they drive through all these communities in a very old school mentality with a red and blue pencil. We write if a home is under construction or if it's finished or if we see somebody living in that home. So when we're talking about starts and closings and inventory today, a start is not a permit, it's an actual new home construction that has begun. Sticks and bricks are going up essentially. And then a closing on the other end is not a deed conveyance or a contract, it's an actual new home occupancy. So somebody has not only bought that home, but they have now moved into it. The reason we do that, which is a little bit of an old school way of doing it, is because when you get into different parts of the housing cycle, you really want to know what's out there in front of you. The other reason most new home builders don't list all of their homes, their inventory homes on MLS. They may list 1 or 2 to get their community to pop up. They may list all of their closings on there to get the comps right, but they don't really list everything that's out there. So from an inventory standpoint, that's the methodology that we go through. It's also a really good gauge when you're looking at occupancy instead of closings to what sort of population growth that we've had within these different areas of the triangle. One other kind of terminology jargon that I'll use is VDL. That's a vacant developed lot. So that is a improved lot ready for home construction right now today. But we'll kind of go through that, and I'll remind you all of the terminology as we go through. For the local market, when I'm talking about the triangle, this is the area that I'm talking about. I know it may be a little washed out, those colors, but it's essentially Chatham County, Orange County, Durham, Wake, Johnston, and then Franklin and Granville. And then we actually do survey a few communities that are up in Vance County as well. What does Metrostudy do? Essentially, we are a marketing and feasibility company. We provide market intelligence to our client base, but we work on projects that are either doing great and want to increase their absorption, or they're maybe broken or need some fixing or some tweaking. Okay, so really what drives housing construction, especially new home growth, is job creation, right, and population growth. People get jobs, they move to an area, they get relocated, and then really for our market, Another quick show of hands. How many of y'all have sold a home in the last year or couple of years to somebody that was moving here because their kids moved here and got a job and they want to be close to their grandkids? Okay, that is another big driver in our market. And that's certainly had a lot of effects on, one, the product type and the product features that we are starting to become commonplace in the market, but then also community development, what aspects of a new home community that we build. A lot of active adult or age-targeted or age-restricted type communities pop up within the region, or there's just an aspect of it that is geared a little bit more towards that buyer profile. But the big driver behind all of that is job creation. Now, in this market, a typical year would be 20 to 25,000. Now, we have had anything but a typical year since the last 6 years, right? And we're still kind of going through that process of figuring out, one, companies are still in the point where they are just now getting whole. They went through a downturn, had some layoffs, and brought some folks back when they absolutely needed them to. But a lot of them learned to operate more leanly. More folks learned how to wear different hats. They learned to do different jobs and multitask. A lot of that is going on. And with a lot of the uncertainty that has still been in the economy, there has been a holding back to hire more folks, whether on their staff. Now, what industries we've seen growth at are pretty positive industries for our sector, or our regional economy. Healthcare and education, obviously, with the university system and the medical schools here and the hospitals, that's a big driver for us. Professional and business services. Well, that's really a lot of the the RTP type buyers. Engineering, information services, obvious as well. One industry on there that you see is red still, which we still haven't really added jobs over the last couple of years, has been the mining, logging, and construction. So really, the echo of all of this advanced or increased housing construction and housing activity that we've had over the last couple of years, the reason that you still have a negative number there is because most of that's driven by trades, essentially. Subcontractors and contractors hiring folks to swing hammers and hang drywall and paint. All of those guys are still in the process of getting whole. They took discounts on their labor and their materials and what they were willing to do per job through the downturn to keep them in business, and now they're getting back to level or back to where they were, and they just haven't taken that next step to start adding folks. When you hear about housing leading recoveries out of recessions, that's what we're talking about. When for every home that you build, you create 3 jobs, essentially, is kind of the old rule of thumb. Right now, for every home we build, we're probably adding 1 job or 2 jobs. And it's just a little bit of waiting for these different sectors and these different participants in the economy to believe in it and really move forward. Right now, they're going through the process of getting back to getting whole again, getting back to where each job is X amount, and then that makes sense for them and they can move forward. Once that fully makes its way through the system, we believe that construction sector of the economy will really start to pick up. Even though we have not been gaining as many jobs over the last year as we would like to, what we have certainly not been doing as much, and what has been a real positive, is the layoff side, or folks leaving their jobs or being let go from their job. If you see, I know this is a little hard to see, but on the very far right-hand side of that graph, you see that blue line. That's initial unemployment claims. So that's somebody that lost their job and then immediately went out and filed for a new unemployment benefits. And that number has dropped for the lowest on that chart, obviously, so really the lowest since a pre-recessionary time, which is excellent, excellent. Gaining jobs is great, but if you're adding a lot of jobs but then laying off as many people as you are adding, then it's really a net zero, right? But if you're adding some marginal job growth and not letting as many people go, that's really a net positive. It also means that those folks that are staying in their jobs or in their current employment situations, you would expect their wage level to increase. So some raises. We're not going to let you go. We're not going to hire somebody necessarily, but we're going to give you a raise. And so that adds to disposable income that gets people in a little bit better financial situation. So a little bit more of a positive situation moving forward, especially when you're thinking about making a major purchase, whether that's buying a home or a car or TV, whatever it may be. The economy here locally and nationally is really driven by folks' willingness to go out and make larger purchases and smaller purchases. And that's driven by their job security. Excuse me. Okay, so closings and inventory through MLS. Up about just a little under 20% this year or over the last 12 months. This is a rolling 12-month annual total of sales through MLS. And the sales growth has been great year over year. We're starting to see, though, a little bit more of a normalization. And Stacy's going to talk a lot more about the existing home market and that side of it. But I think the trend to take away from this slide, the next couple of slides, is a couple of things. One, sales growth has been great, but it's starting to stabilize. And I think a lot of that is from the inventory side. It's the listing side. And we've seen some increases in listings, which will show up in these numbers later on. But you still have had that year-over-year decrease in inventory. So there's still a lack or unwillingness for folks to go out and list their homes for sale. That begins to change when they think that they're going to make more money on their home, or they're going to at least make their money back on a home that they purchased, maybe the guys that purchased at the very, very top of the market. When you have higher sales and lower inventory, your months of supply gets lower. 5.8 months is super, super low. If you look at that on a quarterly basis, it would even be lower. But I like to look at the 1-year trend. 5.8 months is pretty firmly in the seller's side of the market, which means prices go up. The stories of folks listing their home and then selling it a few days later for 5% more than what they were asking. Those sort of stories start happening when you're in this sort of market. And what shows up is price appreciation. Now, this graph and then the next one, I'll just flip back and forth. They're just Durham and Raleigh, the two MSAs separate. What this is the Fhfa home price index. And what the Fhfa is essentially the regulator for Fannie and Freddie and most of the government mortgage agencies. And they essentially own all of the mortgages in the U.S. And so they get to see the same transaction on different transactions on the same home over and over and over again through time. So what we like this to look at house price appreciation better than just a pure sales number, because if you're in a market where you're selling more and more higher priced homes and less lower priced homes, then you just kind of get that natural rise in price. But if you're looking at the same home sold over and over and over again, you get to really see what folks are feeling in their own home. Couple of things about this. We are a historically really ho-hum 3.5–4% year-over-year appreciation. And man, that may seem like it's not the greatest thing in the world. That is the best thing in the world for a market. If I were to show you a graph, this graph for Los Angeles or Las Vegas, in 2007 they had 50% year-over-year appreciation for a couple years in a row, which is awesome. You're doubling your money every 2 years. The downside of that is when that stops and you have 40% depreciation year over year. Huge swings in that price. That is not a market that creates a lot of certainty and stability in your market. When you're in a market like ours where you're only doing a 3.5–4% a year, it doesn't seem like you're setting the world on fire, but it feels a whole lot better on the downside of that. The other thing that has done for us, it has limited our exposure to the foreclosure market or the foreclosure woes that many of our other markets around the country have seen. We had our share of those just like everybody else did, but the gap from where they need to be to where they are today is much slower. Another takeaway from this, which is kind of hard to tell, in this, what it essentially means is those folks that bought at the top of the market, second quarter 2007, they are getting closer to being back to be a real seller. They're not, a lot of that inventory slide that you look at where it's, how could if you think about it, even though we had a downturn in housing construction, we were still building houses. And we weren't going out and tearing down houses and bulldozing 5,000 houses a year or anything like that. We were building, we're adding to the stock. So that existing home listing inventory should rise every year. It should almost always rise. Sales can move up or down, but the inventory should almost always rise. But we haven't had that. We've actually had a decrease in inventory year over year over year for the last several years. What drives a lot of that is folks that bought in 2007 who are still below, they're still underwater, right? And even if they're back to even, they don't have the 6% for us in this room, right? So they're still a little bit below that. As you get closer to getting back to hold, that's where you start to see those folks come back into the market. That provides a little bit more inventory, but it also provides some more buyers to the market. When those folks do come back into the market, though, you guys are going to have a tough job because they are going to be very wary of what's going on out in the market. They're going to have been through some rough times. They're going to be a much harder seller or buyer to work with. But I think that there will be a good chunk of them out there in the market that have gotten through it, that have either broken even or made a little bit of money and decided, okay, now it's time to go to the next home, next phase. So just for that end, we see that price appreciation is returning. We do think that you're going to see, in that chart over the next several quarters, you're going to see a pretty good rise. This year, price appreciation has been pretty significant, but long term, we're going to get back to a more moderate 3.5–4% growth rate. We believe that the listings will have already started to increase, but you'll start to see that year-over-year gain. And then, as I said, the peak market buyers are going to start coming back into the market. You're going to see more of those folks wanting to list their home, and then more of them, deciding maybe it's time to move on to the next home. Okay, so this is the new home market, and again, this is a start and a closing is us driving by it, and it's an actual start, it's not a permit, and then closing is the actual move-in. So there's a little bit of a lag in here, but what's really good about it, the way that we do it is we know what real demand is within the market. Even if, another quick show of hands, how many of y'all have sold a home to an investor, whether it was a private investor or a group? Okay, so a good amount of that. When you have that, when you have a lot of investors in the market, if they buy a home and it just sits there vacant and they don't get anybody to move in there to either buy it or rent it from them, and it's a new home, it's still really new home inventory. So what we have seen is, even though we have seen a good amount of investors, about 10 to 15% of the market has been investors, those investor buyers have had somebody occupy that home. Whether they flipped it to somebody else and then somebody moved in, or they bought it to rent it, we have seen that shows up in this number from the new home side no matter what. So the follow through as far as what we have been building over the last couple of years has been very, very positive. Had about a 30% increase last year, on track for about a 27% increase in starts this year. Closings are very, very closely in line with the number of starts year over year. But the pace of new home growth will start to moderate. Even if there is a number out there in the market that is probably the historical number of new home starts we need to maintain population, it's a broader process than just all of a sudden going out and starting 10,000 homes. You go from a market that started 16,000 homes, drop down to 6,000 to 5,500. You think, well, we can just turn the lights on and get going again. It is a much more in-depth process than that. It takes a lot of time. So while you have seen pretty good gains in new home starts over the last couple of years, you should start to see that moderate to grow at a little bit more normal pace. Like I said, with that, really, you have 30% year-over-year gains twice, 2 years in a row. You would think, man, there's got to be a huge amount of inventory out there. But like we said, there has been actually a shortage of inventory. This is total inventory. This is models under construction and finished vacant housing. These homes may be sold already. They may have a big fat sold sticker on the front of them, and they're raising prices throughout the neighborhood. But until we see somebody living in those homes, we say anything can happen. So what does that look like, though, with that slow increase? You've had about a 16% increase in total inventory over the last year. Your months of supply, that red line up there. So that's the number of closings that we've had over the last 12 months and how long it would take us, if we didn't build another home, how long it would take us to get through all that inventory that's sitting out there right now. So 7.5 months is a little bit above kind of the national 6 to 7 months inventory number that's we consider equilibrium. But if you look at the triangle historically, since 98, once we first got here, 7.5 months has been our market average. A little bit higher inventory market. Keep in mind this includes not only single-family detached, but townhomes and condos as well. So 7.5 months is really historically normal for us. When you start digging into the submarkets, though, that's where you really see shortages of inventory. From a product standpoint, townhome inventory, which historically is always going to be a little bit higher because you got to build usually 4 units at a time. So you're just always normally going to have a little bit higher inventory. Townhome inventory has almost a little less than 6 months of supply. So a very, very short supply of housing for townhome buyers. Which, by the way, townhome buyers are really replacing kind of our historical single-family starter home buyers in this market. You're starting to see more folks that are living in a more urban environment, but also there's just not a whole lot of first-time starter home, single-family, detached housing being constructed in the market. Finished vacant inventory. So this is really the best indicator of whether or not we are in a market where it's getting overheated or it's really underserved. When you have a months of supply at 2 months, which is at the very bottom of the equilibrium range, it's probably actually a little bit lower than that if you start considering how many of those are sold and we just haven't, just from a timing standpoint, we just didn't drive by when somebody lived in there yet. That is very, very low month supply. That's back into that story of there's really no inventory out there. The flip side of that is there's some inventory coming. Whether or not that is going to be, for sale inventory is still to be seen, but it's out there. Most of that construction is going. But again, another 10% year-over-year decrease in the amount of inventory out there. So by price, all of these price buckets, again, the 6 to 7.5 month range is really what's equilibrium. As you move up in price, the build time gets longer. Those buyers are usually a little bit more concerned about each detail of the home, and so the process takes a little bit longer. So a 10.8 or 11.2 month supply for a 500 and above, which these are base list price. So once you start talking about options and upgrades, these houses can really, really move up in price pretty substantially. That 500 and above is really a $650 or almost $700,000 house on average. Many of those are above $1 million. So an 11.2 month supply in that price bucket is really actually pretty normal, actually pretty good considering how many buyers are out there for that market. So throughout the price points and throughout the different product lines, we continue to see a little bit lower inventory year over year. You're starting to stabilize a little bit. The building community is starting to get their feet under them. And that's a positive for us being able to consistently offer some options to our buyers. All right, so vacant developed lots. This is really the biggest, the hottest topic among the building community. 23,040 lots in the triangle, in the 8-county area that I talked about. Now that seems like a really big number, right? And you hear the story of there's no lots out there. When you start stripping out one submarkets, start looking at various submarkets. Cary, Apex, and Mooresville, that submarket, they have 11 month supply of lots. It takes you on average 18 to 24 months to take an untitled piece of land, entitle it, develop it, bring it to market. So if you've got an 11 month supply and it takes you 18 months minimum to deliver one new lot to the market, that's where the shortage is. That's where you get into that situation where you have no lot supply. Where most of these lots are that are not spoken for, or not currently having activity on, they're scattered. 1 or 2 lots in the back of a community here, 1 or 2 lots in the back of the community over there, and those numbers just add up across the triangle. There are a few larger tracts of lots that are out there. And as I said, these are developed lots. These aren't the entitled or future lots. These, Window Falls, I know that was in the paper yesterday, that's 4,000 units. There's only 143 of those lots, of those 4,000 units that are actually developed lots. So this is just what's on the ground. And what that means, though, on an overall market, when you have 31.6 months of supply, which is still a little bit above the equilibrium, it means that the development engine is beginning to turn on. The biggest driver of lot development is third-party financing. It's banks willing to make acquisition and development loans to go out, buy land, move the dirt, develop the lots, and bring them to market. And they have, that was really one of the things that they all got caught up in and stung by in the downturn. And so when a regulator comes into a bank nowadays and the bank says, hey, we've got a shortage of lots. There's only 11 months supply of lots in Cary. This is the hottest this is the most active submarket in the Triangle. We need to be, if we make a development loan here, we are going to make a ton of money. We need to do this. The regulator says, nope, there's 31.6 months supply of lots in the overall market, and you've got to have outstanding terms from the builder. They basically got to put all the cash up, and you're just being a lending facility to move their cash. As this number starts to get lower, the terms and the regulatory constraints on development gets a little bit looser, and builders and developers are able to get access to financing to go out and make those loans and acquire those loans, acquire land, make development, bring new lots to the market. And we're starting to see that. These are annual lot deliveries, so this is the number of new lots that we are adding to the market each year. Still a shortage, right? If we're building 9,000 new homes a year, but we're only delivering 5,000 new lots to the home a year, you still have that shortage. So that inventory, that lot inventory picture, while it's brightening, and there are certainly new communities coming out of the market, I expect this number to be a little bit higher than that by the end of the year. It is still a slower process. So if you've got a buyer right now, the sense of urgency that you can build into not only an existing home market but the new home market is really straightforward. When these new deals, when these new communities do come online and these new products do come online, the cost basis for those lots, the cost basis for those homes, everything is reset to 2013 prices, which have gone up considerably. So if there's somebody that's on the fence about making a deal, whether or not they should buy a home right now, next year when they come back to that community, not only will prices be significantly higher than what they were at today, but their choices may be a lot different as far as how much house they can get. So that's what I've gotten for you. I think the two biggest takeaways for this presentation is the development activity is picking up. So you are going to have new communities and new products that are going to be available from the new home side, but they're going to be at higher prices. And we're going to start to see sales or starts pace moderate or go down a little bit from the new home side. What that means is, again, a little bit higher prices, but the inventory situation as far as homes for sale isn't going to get alleviated from the new home side as quickly as we may think. So that's my presentation. Before I get out of here, does anybody have any questions or anything you want to buzz me about? Hey, Stacy?
Talk a little bit about the labor situation with the new home market. They could probably sell a lot more homes if they had more labor. Do you get the feeling that the is on the way?
Yeah, they talked about it a little bit. You could absolutely, the new home industry wants to put more homes on the market. They want to be building more than 8,700 homes a year. When this downturn happened, the guys that swing the hammers and paint the houses and hang shingles and hang siding, they went somewhere else. They went to find another job. And it didn't just happen here. It happened all over the place. Even in Texas, which is a market which is relatively, they weathered the storm much better than almost everywhere else in the country. Even there, we had a consistent activity, and you didn't really have a lot of construction crews shut down. Those guys went and started working on gas rigs in Texas and North Dakota because they could make a lot of money doing that for less work, essentially. From a construction standpoint, from a capacity standpoint of the industry to go out and build more homes, it's still very, very constrained. And that's what feeds back into the price of those houses. Not only does it take you a little bit longer to build that home or deliver that home to market, but those guys that are building the homes are asking for more money, and they're saying, hey, I was talking to a builder yesterday. He got called 7:30 in the morning on the way to the job. The siding guy said, hey, I can't do this job for what we agreed for. And he said, well, hey, how much more do you want to do? It was 20% more. And so you get a 20% price increase on a home in 30 minutes on a phone call. And those guys that are out there building the homes, they're in control because so many of these builders have got these backlogs and they've got these orders that they need to commit to, they need to fulfill. And so what that does is that we've got to slow down absorption a little bit to help us get caught up. That raises your prices up. Yeah?
Will your slides be available somewhere?
Yeah, I think so. Yep.
They'll be on the website and a video too.
There's a lack of supply in the urban and suburban market. Do you think there's any risk of overbuilding in the downtown apartment market?
Okay, so I looked at apartments, and I'm not sure specifically downtown or not, but I looked at just multifamily, what's going on out there, right? And you think there's 11,000 units under construction right now in the Triangle apartments. That's a ton, right? But if you look at, population growth, the good thing about our survey every 9 days is that move-in number. I can compare that move-in number to population growth. I could say, here's an area, and based on the ratio of multifamily to single family, this is how many folks have moved into an area. So we did that same exercise for the entire Triangle, and basically since 2009, even though we've had the uptick in multifamily, especially multifamily has been a huge component over the last couple of years, we're still under where the census projected our population would be. So with all of that multifamily construction, you're still actually a little bit under what total population growth has been in our area. That's been folks, living with their parents in their basement or multi-generational housing, those sort of things. Folks that are second, maybe it's from a desire or they just have to do it. We haven't been providing the housing to meet population growth, whether that's been from a single family for sale or from a multifamily rental market. So the multifamily guys, the guys that are financing and building these apartments, they are fully aware of how many homes that are how many apartment units are being constructed out there. And you have seen definitely a slowdown in the financing and new multifamily deals that are coming out of there. But even when you get that wave of units on the market, it may slow down absorption a little bit. It may, those folks that are really getting pushed on price because their rental rate is going up, whatever it may be, 10, 15% over last year, and they're starting to think, hey, it's time to buy a home, or maybe because this I'm paying $1,200 a month in rent, that doesn't make sense to me. I'm going to go pay myself rent and basically get some equity. So that's going to happen. The 10,000 units coming on at once may slow down that pressure, that rental rate increase. It may increase vacancies a little bit, but historically we're like less than 5% vacancy for the apartment market. Really, anything 7 to 8% depending on the deal. Multifamily is kind of a weird market, but if you got 92, 93% occupancy in your deal, you probably feel good about that. So even with all of that multifamily construction coming on, I don't think that it's going to drastically affect the home for sale or purchase market. There's certainly a lot of units under construction, and it's whenever you get that, you're probably going to have some sort of stutter. But I think from an overall standpoint, it's not nearly as concerning as what I think we all think when we hear that many units are under construction. Yeah, you were first. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So Jay, I don't know if you can speak to this, but as far as development goes, of course you have national home builders sort of being their own developer, working as a developer and pointing their own product versus developer or neighborhoods where they sell lots of different builders. Have you been able to compare trends? Do you see a trend? I feel like a lot of the developments that we know about oftentimes we're bought out by national home builders to finish up the rest of the neighborhood, that sort of thing. So I was curious if you have any sense for, are you seeing new developments by developers, not just?
So I don't think, there's a lot going into that. So the reason that national home builders have been developing so much of their own lots is because the price of land has increased so much that that's the way it makes sense for them to account for it on their books, is to develop themselves, basically charge themselves zero fee on the lot, and then they make their profit on the home sale. What that has done is squeeze that traditional third-party developers' margins because the in-home price and what builders are willing to pay has been squeezed on that, so it hadn't made sense for it. What most developers have been doing throughout the downturn has been essentially fee building, or if they do, are doing an actual development for, they've been selling in bulk the lots to the national builders because the national builders can write them a check and take those lots off them right now. That's changing because of several things. It's very, very hard, and the terms are very, very complicated for a local regional developer to work with a national home builder. That's usually a pretty good tussle there as far as what terms look like. It's a trying, and then the developer really doesn't make as much money in a takedown scenario from a local builder or a smaller builder where they just sell them 2 or 3 lots each quarter, and then the next quarter the price is raised a little bit. When they do a bulk lot purchase to a larger builder, it's one price and they sold them all at once and they're out of the deal and the risk is averted, but in the long run they didn't make as much money. So that situation is changing, but it's not as, that's a very, very slow process. And again, there is still a good amount of risk averseness in the development market because there still are the scattered lots around. But also they're just now starting to get to where the margin scenario where it actually makes sense for them to make money and develop lots is getting to that point. You will still, I believe that you will still continue to see the larger national public builders develop their own lots at a higher and higher rate. It just makes more sense for them to do that. But as far as there is a big market out there of locally based builders that are willing to pay for lots, and the developers know that, and that's a good scenario for them. It's a very symbiotic relationship for them to both exist. I think you also larger national development companies, the guys that go around to different parts of the country and put in master plan communities, larger tract land communities. I think you'll see a little bit more of that here. It's still hard to do because it's so hard to assemble 1,000 acres in the triangle. To do that is a super time-consuming and hard process. But there is a willingness, certainly, to come here from that development side. So it's changing, but yeah, you're absolutely right. The home builders are doing most of their own development right now. Yeah.
For sellers who are making the comparison of what it's like to sell now versus in a 3 to 5 year time frame ahead, what can we share with them to help them make that comparison of what they're looking at?
Somebody that is thinking about selling in 3 to 5 years, or
They're debating whether to sell now or what the picture would look like, what they can reasonably expect in a 3 to 5 year time frame. How that would be different.
if you sell now, we're in a seller's market, right? So you have really, the seller now has a lot more position. They may get, and we have seen much more higher accelerated price appreciation over the last couple of years than we have historically. And that's because of the inventory constraint. In 3 or 5 years, it's going to be a different market. There is going to be more capacity in the market to build new homes. There will be those home buyers that bought in 2007 that are still not there yet. They're going to be there in 3 to 5 years. 2 to 3 years, those guys that bought in 2007 should be back to even. So it's going to be, a seller right now is in a much more of a predictable market than you're going to be in 3 to 5 years. I can't tell you what's going to happen in 3 to 5 years. I don't think anybody can. But if the trends continue, that's what I would expect to see. Yeah.
All right. Why don't thank Jay Colvin for his presentation.